Well, welcome everybody to the November Global Encounters and First Nations Peoples Seminar. Today I'm actually coming to you from Gadigal lands, but as in all of our seminars, we acknowledge that we are standing on the unceded lands of traditional owners across Australia, and we give thanks to elders past and present for the support that they've given us in this project. Particularly pertinent tonight when we've got such an exciting seminar, a much anticipated. We've been, I think we had to reschedule it twice due to some sorry business. But tonight I'm delighted to say we have Professor Annie Clarke from the University of Sydney, from the Archaeology Museum and Heritage Studies. And we've also got Dr Ursula Frederick, who's from the University of Canberra. And they're going to be talking to us about inland seas, maritime imagery in the central plateau of Groote Eylandt. So please take over, Annie and Urs.
Thanks, Lynette. I'm just going to share my screen, folks, and let me get organised, and then I'll begin. Okay, all right. Just going to make everybody like Lynette and Ursie and David a bit tiny in the corner.
Yep.
All right. All right. So I'm just going to start. I'm going to read, but I also will talk to slides as well. Okay, well, to start, I'm speaking today from the unceded lands of the Yantarrnga and Darug peoples of the Blue Mountains. Ursula is beaming in from similarly unceded Ngambri and Ngunnawal country, and we acknowledge their elders past and present. And we also acknowledge any First Nations people present here today. But importantly, given the topic of the talk, we also acknowledge and thank the Yantarrnga-speaking peoples of the Groote Eylandt archipelago, without whom I don't think either Ursie or myself would be here today, both in terms of their duty of care when we're having adventures, but also in terms of the fact that neither of us would have our careers, I don't think, without their input to our work. And I'd also really like to thank the Global Encounters team for asking us to give this seminar. We had to cancel last year when one of our very close friends or Groote Eylandt family members passed away far too early at only 50, and we went up to her funeral. Attending the funeral, which went for a week, and indeed working on Groote Eylandt with Wanamamalia and the Yantarrnga clan in particular, for the last 30-something years has been a privilege and an honour. So for my part, this seminar is tinged with a touch of sadness, but also an enduring optimism, not just because of the passing of our friend G. Yantarrnga, but because I think this will be my last seminar before I retire next year. After a somewhat frustrating career, particularly the last 3 years of thankless and endless administration, from which I'm only just beginning to recover both my energy and my sanity. On the optimistic side, however, any small contribution I've made will be passed on and taken up by the younger, faster, but with far less insurance. To misquote the lines from Fried Green Tomatoes folks, so Steve Skidmore is going to start his PhD at the ANU next year on the archaeology of the Central Plateau region, which is part of today's talk. And of course, Ursula, the original younger, faster model, who will also continue working on the rock art with me if I'm allowed. And on Groote too, there's a whole new generation of young people who really want to engage with and learn about their old people and their places and how to look after them. So I should say that the seminar we're going to talk and present today is a reflection of those long-term collaborations, not only just between myself and my co-author Ursula Frederick, who's here for the questions and also to interject if I get things wrong, but also the individuals and families on Groote Eylandt with whom we've worked. It's customary for us to acknowledge them as the traditional owners of the lands and sea that we'll be talking about. But I'd also like to add that Ursie and I are very aware of what a privilege it has been to work in this part of the world and with people who we've formed really long-term and enduring connections and friendships with, and for whom Groote Eylandt is home. We are indebted to those families and individuals who welcomed us and worked with us for so many years and allowed us to interpret and handle and speak of their old people's belongings and ancestral deep time histories. And to that end, Lily and Shirley, two of our friends, are really worried now that I'm an old lady, Daddy Unkwa in an Indiliakwa, and I'm about to retire, because I think they probably think they think I'm going to drop dead immediately on retirement. And also because, as Lily said to me recently, how are those young people going to learn? So Ursie, myself, Lily, Shirley, probably some of the others as well, Holly and Rebecca, we're all going to be on holiday next year in Cairns. So I'm saving up for a lot of shopping, and I might need, quite frankly, I might need a GoFundMe page, but you know, there we go. So I'm just going to show some slides now of some people. If this is going to do its thing. No, hang on, that's it. So these are some of the people.
Annie, I can't see the slides.
What?
I don't know if anyone else can.
I can see them.
You can?
I can see
Okay.
them.
All right. There must be something to do with my view. Ignore me.
Okay. Oh, thanks, Ursula. I don't know why. Okay, so these are people that all the people that I worked with when I did my PhD, and then some people that I work with, or people I still work with when I went up in the mid-90s do my postdoctoral work. There's Ursula, a very much younger Ursula Frederick, can I say, younger, faster model there in the middle. But you know, it's very much community-based archaeology. You know, and some of these photos are just gorgeous. I love that one in the corner of Sheena and Cheryl making hand stencils at Ararapa. But you know, that nowadays they say their kids give them grief at that photo of them in their t-shirt and undies on the beach. But you know, in many ways, those photos encapsulate all the kinds of things that we did as part of those projects in the 90s. And then here's photographs from more recent fieldwork on Groote Eylandt. There's Lily and Shirley in the top after the funeral. There's a photo of myself and the sisters, Shirley, Yantarrnga, Faith and Amy at the Yantarrnga lab as part of that we set up as part of the Groote Eylandt Archaeology Repatriation Project. And so whilst we repatriated all of my archaeological collections and worked on the ones that had sort of remained in boxes for a rather embarrassingly long time, we also took traditional owners back to as many of the sites that I'd worked on with their parents and grandparents, sort of repatriating knowledge. And as part of that, you can see some of the people. So there's Jennifer, Yantarrnga, Asen and James, and James is now we worked with his father Nabby, and James is now the elder traditional owner for Yantarrnga. Steve Skipmore is in the corner there at the bottom there, and then Hugh Bland, who's the Anindyaga Land Council anthropologist. So these are, you know, nothing ever happens, you know, in isolation. It's really due to the sort of collaborations and friendships and efforts of everybody pictured here that we've actually managed to do our work. Okay, so today's seminar, which Ursula and I have pulled together, is something of a think piece in preparation for a paper that we'll write over the next little while. So it is it's ideas rather than a finalized analysis, and certainly not worked through in any great sense. And there's certainly minimal data, but we do have some pictures. So it's going to be a bit of a story, as is my style, and I guess that interweaves the fieldwork, the rock art and the archaeology with the stories of working on country, the people we have known since they were young adults and children, which in itself is part of the beauty of long-term relationships that include research and of the slow archaeology movement as well. Storytelling, or storying as it often gets called in the academic literature, for Ursula and me both, not only humanises our disciplinary approaches, allowing us to include creative practices, but also reflects and respects the lived experience of being on Groote Eylandt, where archaeology ends up being such a small part of the time we spend there. And I guess it's salient for the narrative that when we started the repatriation project in 2018, after a long absence from Groote, and were working in the lab with the Yantarrnga sisters, sorting the old people's belongings that their dad Nabby had helped us find and excavate, one of the first things they told us in one of the many conversations we had was that their parents never stopped telling them the stories of doing the worker out at Salt Lake and Central Hill. So storying seems an apt way to present our collective work. The presentation today also draws on a paper Ursula presented on behalf of us both at the SHA conference in Portugal earlier this year, based on work she did on Groote as part of her DECRA, not only documenting the Groote Eylandt repatriation project, but also presenting her own response as an artist to that experience. Many of these works, were part of the exhibition that Ursula did as a major outcome of her DECRA, and is in a wonderful and delightful catalogue of essays and images called Expanding the Field. And I think, Ursi, it's on your, is it a PDF on your academia page?
Yes, or I can send it to anyone who's interested.
Well, yeah, I think it's great. Anyway, in the SHA paper, and here we draw on blue humanities scholarship that focuses on the poetics of planetary waters, the ocean in particular, to think about the historical and cultural relationships between humans and water. Steve Mentz, a literary scholar, in his chapter Thinking Blue Humanities, notes that blue humanities is a poetics of planetary waters that aims to clarify the relationships between humans and water in all its forms and phases. The blue humanities, he says, combines water with human ideas, and it's something we're both very drawn to. In our blue humanities thinking, following Mentz, the sea is foregrounded as a medium of exchanges, relationships, and interactions, a dynamic, fluid landscape where repeating patterns of diurnal movement, the ebb of flow and tides and waves, result from the exchanges between the extraterrestrial body of the moon and the physics of motion in water, broken by other atmospheric exchanges of air pressure and moisture. Okay, wind and rain, to be prosaic. Exchanges between cultures, exchanges between the sea and land, the surface and the deep, exchanges between sea creatures and humans, or indeed sea creatures who become human and humans who become sea creatures, ontologies, geographies, an exchange between wet and dry. In painting, that exchange of water and dry ochre leads to the creation of a colloid, a material mass suspended in liquid medium. On the canvas, boundaries between media and between wet and dry can be blurred or made clear. So thinking about water as more than something just wet and salty brings to mind the work that Howard Morphy and Francis Morphy did as part of the Blue Mud Bay project now over 20 years ago, where they, along with their Yolngu colleagues, mapped the presence of the ancestors and moieties in the tidal flow of rivers, in the movement of water currents, and in the rocks and reefs of nearshore environment. Water and land are not so ontologically separated from a First Nations perspective as they are from our own Western perspective. Ursi, as a professional artist, and me as an enthusiastic but undoubtedly amateur one, often find it useful to think through images. And so to start us off thinking about the sea, or markada, in Anindyalegwa, and its presence in Anindyalegwa art, this contemporary image is as good a place to start as any. It was commissioned for the Groote Eylandt Resort in Yantarrnga, and while the artist isn't named, we think most of the images were done by Lara Elder, now deceased, who was one of Groote Eylandt's better-known artists. So in looking at these images, 4 things have emerged to comment on. First, the ground, in art terms or art historical terms, the background. It's black, and of course that is the what Groote Eylandt bark paintings are known for. It's made from the manganese that has both provided Groote with many riches, but also has devastated country down the western side of the island. The motifs, as you'll see, that they're commonly occurring motifs that we see in Groote Eylandt rock art, a flat profile, solid infill, boats, luggers, prows, canoes, and sea creatures. So the style is something that is not dissimilar to what you see in rock art. But the one thing that is different, I guess, why the sea is everywhere but never present, particularly in the rock art, is the use of sort of an artistic convention to depict the motion of both the dolphins, but also the boats and the canoe through water. The only place I've ever seen that in rock art is in fact at Jewellery in the Wellington Ranges, where a couple of the European boats are also depicted with the bow waves as they're pushing through the water. So it's not a common artistic convention in First Nations art in the Northern Territory. Groote Eylandt, for those of us who are, perhaps more geographically challenged than we'd like to admit, is 50 kilometres from mainland Arnhem Land in the Gulf of Carpentaria in Northern Australia. The main island is Australia's 4th largest island, covers some 2.2 thousand square kilometres, and comprises stony plateaus, sand dunes, woodlands, rivers, lakes, and lagoons. This land and seascape includes large offshore islands as well as small rocky outcrops, low-lying coral and sandy islands. In Groote Eylandt's song and story, the archipelago was formed by marine mammals. 3 ancestral animals, sawfish, shovel-nosed shark, and shark ray, travelled together from the mainland to Bikini Island and onto Groote, forming country as they journeyed. And this story of cooperation between fish, shark, and ray not only describes how significant features of the Groote Eylandt land and seascape were created, but also how country and clans are related and linked across the waters of the Gulf of Carpentaria. It is an account that reminds us of the fundamental role that creativity plays in the ontology and knowledge system of Groote Eylandt people, and illuminates the central place that the maritime world and sea country holds within their lives and consciousness. The ancestral story of Groote Eylandt's formation resonates with the current radiocarbon dates for the earliest settlement of the archipelago, around 3,200 years ago, after the sea level rose following the last glacial maximum. The archaeological signatures register an oceanic orientation in the form of coastal occupation, middens and rock shelter sites that are dominated by deposits with a marine economy, and the visual representation in many rock paintings of turtles, dugongs, dolphins, and fishing scenes. One of the distinctive features, of course, that the archaeology reveals is a long history of encounter and exchange between local Groote Eylanders and the fishermen from Southeast Asia. The seasonal visitation of seafaring Makassans to Groote Eylandt over hundreds of years is reflected strongly not only in local material and culture and language, but again through creative expression in the songs, stories, and paintings made on country. The details in paintings of the Makassan visitors and their location far beyond the shoreline indicates a depth and breadth of cross-cultural relations and activities that links the sea countries of Groote to a vast global trading network, as everybody obviously is aware through global encounters, extending as far as China. And the ongoing influence of these connections is also evident in contemporary artworks, with references to Makassans remaining relevant some 120 years after the annual visits ceased. And in fact, I'm not sitting in front of it, but I've got a contemporary Groote painting of a Makassan prow. So the archaeological picture of Groote Eylandt has been established largely by research focusing on excavating Indigenous places associated with Alawura, which means old times, as well as the insights on Makassan history by Campbell McKnight, the rock art by archaeologists such as Fred McCarthy and George Chalupka, as well as anthropologists Fred Rose and Peter Worsley, and of course ourselves several decades later. The work undertaken by Ursula and myself was a community-based archaeology, which meant that the practice of archaeology was only one aspect of our daily lives. Digging and recording rock art was integrated into other activities, caring for country through fire, making damper, making spears, fishing, hunting, or storing around the fire at night. We camped with families on beaches, with individuals like Nabi and Polly Yantarrnga. Claude Mamarika, Edna Barra were our co-researchers in locating and excavating their old people's camping places. In more recent years, oh, thank God that's the right slide, our work on Groote Eylandt has taken the form of a repatriation project and focused on moving excavated materials from Sydney, where they were stored in my office and the lab space, and returned to Groote, where they can be kept on country. This process included knowledge return in the form of taking younger people and traditional owners back to the sites originally visited by us with their parents and grandparents, as well as sorting excavated material on island at a temporary lab set up in the town of Yantarrnga. Some of the children of those Groote Eylanders who had excavated test pits and carried out the sorting under my guidance. And this extended period of sorting on country was a time of conversation, separating out the shell, charcoal, ochre, stone, bone, organic matter, raised questions about what the old people ate, and discussion about activities and events from different periods. Handling particular materials elicited memories and sparked fond reminiscences of loved ones, particularly their mum and dad, Nabi Yantarrnga and Polly Mamarika, and Nabi's brother, Wanella, and his wife, Tully, who had only passed away a few years ago. So, blue assemblages. I now want to turn to think about what we have loosely described as blue assemblages. In this context, marine or maritime images. In the stone country of Central Hill, or Yantarrnga, the blue assemblage creates a maritime presence in non-maritime and definitely non-literal contexts, where Anindyago art practice brings the denizens of the ocean onto and into the sandstone. Unlike the contemporary painting shown earlier, however, the representation of the sea is absent, although we argue that the sandstone rock face and rock faces and overhang become the sea, acting like the concept of the ground in his art historical terms, foregrounding all of those sea creatures, canoes and prows and their occupants. And the area that we're talking about, just to step away from the written text, is that area there where we've been doing some survey work. We have done survey work in other areas around that landscape, but that's Salt Lake. This is kind of core Yantarrnga country, that Salt Lake there. It's as fresh water comes in from the west, and it has a channel out to the sea in the east. It's very long, very big piles of sort of dynamic sand dunes move all the time. And in the center here, where the central plateau is, that's where the key ancestral being Yantarrnga sits today. He's the highest point in that landscape. He's also known as Neningoyua. It was one of his other names. So the blue assemblage consists of turtles, of dolphins, dugongs, turtle food, stingrays, sharks, fish, crocodiles, shore and seabirds, scenes of fishing and hunting marine mammals, pods of dolphins, dugongs, scenes of people in canoes and boats, Makassan prows for the most part. And so this is, again, we've not really worked through this yet, but it's one of these ideas that we're going to pursue, I think, is this idea of what, using blue humanities, what a blue assemblage in an archaeological context might consist of, and how we might use that as a concept to try and interrogate the rock art and the archaeology. Now, here's a terrible slide. Just warning you. I tried to make all the little blue flags bigger, but I ended up going slightly bonkers in the process and losing half the flags. So anyway, this is a map Steve Skipmore did while he was on Groote Eylandt. He just plugged in lots of the recorded sites, and this is most of the sites that we recorded in 2019. So we recorded and re-recorded 68 rock art sites, and part of the re-recording exercise was to go back to places that we'd recorded in the 1990s, where we only had we had film cameras, so analog. And so often, and again because of problems we had with conserving film in really hot conditions without refrigeration, we were only ever able to take 1 or 2 slides of important images. And so now, going back with a digital camera, we're of course able to take far too many pictures, more than we'll ever use. But anyway, we recorded these rock art sites in and around the major occupation site of Yinnamalawalyamunja, including several up a small valley tucked inside the plateau with no obvious views of Salt Lake and the sea beyond. 34 of these sites, and here's a small amount of data, had or 50% had marine motifs, and a further 6 had bird motifs. And of course, birds, these are general images, sorry, from Groote, of boats. I should do that before I get to the birdies. Canoe fishing scenes, prows, several prows, a European boat, the Holly, and Campbell, you should recognize the one in the bottom corner. That's where you went, I think, when you were doing your field work, Yinnamalawalyamunja, right in the Central Plateau, where also Peter Worsley went. And we've recently written about his paper and looked at his material at the his rock artwork and looked at his archives.
Thank you for showing it.
Oh, well, we've done heaps of work there, Campbell. So, you know, when we went there, we didn't know who'd been there, and then we found the picture that you'd published in Encounters in Place. So there you go. But Worsley had been there before, which is something, again, we only found out in the last 2 or 3 years. Okay, so birds are ambiguous, you know, in terms of working out whether they're a part of the blue assemblage or not. They could be shore waders, they could be water birds. And these are some of the bird images that are in some of those sites, of the 5 sites with bird images. So, we'll try to think about what sort of birds they represent, and whether we include those in the broad idea of this blue assemblage. 5 of the sites contain Makassan prow paintings. So again, they're inland. They're 5, 6, 7 kilometers from the coast. They're not really far, but they're in a very different environment. They're not in the nearshore literal environment that most Makassan boat paintings occur in. So this is one of our questions when we first did the work, went back in the mid-90s to actually see if we could find sort of this presence of contact in the central plateau area. And it's something, that we did find, but also hopefully future work will also illuminate a little bit more about this. So, okay, so that's a picture at Yunnamulla. That's James Yantarrnga, who's the elder for Yantarrnga Mob, and his cousin brother Asen. And that's just some of the art there. So interestingly about the central plateau sites, they've all got more than one prow in them. There are a whole range of prows. I think there's 5 or 6 at Yunnamulla, and there's this one which is just around the corner, but it's in a sort of slightly separate rock shelter, and it's actually I think a scene. So I think to me it looks like they've all been painted pretty much at the same time, just from the sort of color and the design. Again, it's quite unusual, but basically it's yellow with a bit of white outlining, but that's quite unusual. But it may well be the kinds of ochres that people had access to up in the high country there. Another prow with a little wurawad or a dog down the bottom there, if you can just see that, yellow outlined in red. In fact, doggies are all the way through the art of this area. There's lots and lots of little wurawadas. And then another prow again in an area in this little valley that's tucked away up above Yunnamulla. And again, it's got some slightly different iconography. It's got it has as many do, the canoes inside, but just a little different in terms of design and some of and the painting as well, yellow. And then there's this one amazing site, very hard to see, very hard to photograph, and we'll probably push it through D-Stretch or something at some point. But what it is a rock shelter. It's covered in paintings, but on the ceilings very badly damaged by salt incrustation. And what we can see is there's probably 4 or 5 white prows. And again, it's very hard to get the detail in the photographs, but we could think about thinking about these as representing a fleet, perhaps, of boats that come or came and people saw. But again, it's unusual to have them all in white for starters, and a group that appears to have all been painted pretty much simultaneously at the same time, as far as we can tell. So it's a scene, another scene of which there are many kinds of scenes in Groote Eylandt rock art. Scenes of often people fighting, people fishing, people hunting maritime marine mammals. So hunting dugong, hunting dolphin. There are often pods of dolphins, pods of dugong, or dolphin and dugong, shoals of fish. So the sort of idea of the scene is something that's very strong in Groote Eylandt rock art, and it's something again we'd like to sort of follow up, I think, in our work.
There's also scenes of camping, and
yes, of course, yeah,
and also scenes of what we think might be either ceremony or some kind of dancing and singing arrangement as well, just to
yes, of course. I always forget about the weird camping ones, right? They're weird, they're just unusual. So this is Yunnamulla. So it's a big cave, and it's probably, you know, we've not seen anything else like this on Groote Eylandt, and we've now flown all around the island on a helicopter. Sandy floor, unusually for Groote, it's got lots of stone artifacts, lots of ochre crayons, and a very large body of work, of which I'm only going to show a few slides. So here's a bird, there's a long-necked turtle, and I think what's probably a woomera. And sometimes there are some figures holding those artifacts, the one on the left-hand side. Kind of typical scene in the, very much that infill and striated infill, but that is quite common for Groote Eylandt. So blocks, very block colour. The little dugong has actually got some very fine red stripes inside the white infill. But then again, that's you know, it's kind of typical for that. And the site is again a sort of very dense site as well. So there's fish, there's dolphin, there's dugong, there's pods of dolphins across the site as well. Okay, oops, let me go back. I'm nearly through. So at Yunnamulla, some of the figures in the paintings are understood by Yantarrnga co-researchers as part of what Jennifer Yantarrnga called a library, an archive of both everyday and otherworldly figures that inhabit the stone country of the Central Plateau. Old Nabby, who we worked with in the 90s, the youngest of three brothers, Jimmy and Wenella being the elder, told us about Yantarrnga being two different peoples. Saltwater, the Makassan people, and the stone or Wurrawerba red-winged parrot people. And Wurrawerba feathers form an important part of the objects made and used by Yantarrnga in ceremonies, and featured really strongly in the funeral of our friend G. Yantarrnga. Her close kin all wore T-shirts with Wurrawerba, and the T-shirts was made especially for the action dancing part of the funeral. Some of the anthropomorphic figures are seen as emergent and still living. They have large feet and large hands, and were talked about as stone people. They still, according to the Yantarrnga, they still live in the stone country, and at Yunnamulla, where the paintings appeared fresh, there was much discussion when we take people up there as whether those stone people had done the paintings recently. Sometimes he's identified as Boom Boom Man, one of those tricksters who takes, in his case, unwary young women away from their camp, never to be seen again. And so when we spent a week or two returning to some of those Central Plateau sites to re-photograph and take the TOs up there, Wurrawerba often flew with us as we walked from the helicopter landing spot towards Yunnamulla. And this was interpreted by the sisters Shirley and Lily and Holly and Rebecca, that the old man Nabby was still there with us, guiding us to the site where the bush was still very much overgrown, and finding our way in took a while the first few times. It hadn't been burnt, we think, since we'd probably been there with the old man 25 years previously. And again, you know, these kind of stories are really redolent when you're working with people, those connections. And when we finished working with the helicopter and Ursi and Steve had gone back down south, I headed out for a trip across land to Yunnamulla with the extended Yantarrnga clan in their four-wheel drives to try and get there and to try and find the track that Nabby had actually made for us through the bush all those years ago. And so we came in similar to the direction that we'd gone in with old Nabby to try and find a track through what was really thick, dense bush. And whilst it took all day, Clayton Wannabe, the guy at the top there, in his truck, which is called Marakulu, he was going ahead, and he's a sort of wild driver, but he eventually found a route through to the base of the cliffs. And, you know, part of what made him so excited, because he was sort of talking faster than you could poke a stick at, was that he felt his granddad in that bush, and that old man, you know, had taken him there through what was really it was really hard to see. We had heaps of punctures, but that old man guided him through the bush. And I think those kinds of connections and stories, you know, they're constantly told and retold. The stories of, because he knew from Nabby's stories to him when he was little grandkid, that that old man had taken me and Ursie through that bush. So in many ways, just to sort of pull this together, even though am I going time-wise? Oh, not too bad, nearly on time, gosh. In many ways, the assemblage of figurative motifs, both the blue assemblage of maritime figures and what we might call the sandy assemblage of terrestrial figures around Central Hill or Yantarrnga, shouldn't really be a surprise. Not just because of the logistics of country, that is, the relatively short distances to bodies of water, both salt and fresh, but because Yantarrnga himself, on his journey from Blue Mud Bay to Groote Eylandt via Beckerton, set down his children, who are the rocks and outcrops along his track, and he taught the Groote Eylanders all about the plants and animals, what was food, where the water was, as well as about the plant and mineral resources to make the old people's belongings and all the ceremony and story that go together. And the rock art, I think, or we think, imprints his history from a deeper past through to the more recent maritime encounters with Makassan fleets and into the missionary times. So in many ways, just to pull this together, for Ursie and myself, utilising different kinds of practice, a mixed methodology, art, archaeology, art practice, storytelling, are both ways of respecting the lived experiences and connections of working on Groote, and a way to make sense of the archaeological landscape, and through thinking about it from a different perspective, within that broad remit of the blue humanities, we can begin to see elisions between the different ways of understanding the histories painted on the rocks. So thank you very much, everyone, for the opportunity to present, which is a very preliminary bit of thinking, as you can probably tell, around the art and archaeology of Groote Eylandt. We'd love to hear any thoughts or responses to what we've just hurled out there, and whether blue thinking is a useful framework. Although, on one hand, I can't see it being published by AA or AO. So, but anyway, thank you, everybody, for listening and giving us the opportunity to share this with you today.
Thank you, Annie. Fantastic. Let's take the spotlight off. Fabulous. Really fascinating. Now, have we got Ursula back? I seem to have lost her.
Ursie, do I need to ring her with the iPhone?
I can ask her to unmute and.
Oh, there she is. She's turning up now.
Sorry. It was to do with my laptop, my external laptop not being open. So anyway, I'm back. I'm here.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both very much. I love the mixed methods, and I really appreciate that, the longevity of this project, that you can go back.
Can I show the last image? Hang on, I forgot.
Please.
I was such an idiot. It's picture both of us are two of our artworks. Hang on. Sorry, I'm just going to share again. Go back to the PowerPoint because I'm an idiot. And then I'll just move it on to the last slide. Sorry, I was so desperate to get to the end. Why is it not going? There we go. No, it doesn't want to move. Where's that? Oh no. Come on, move. It's frozen. All right, just forget about it. I'll stop sharing.
I'll do it.
Can you do it?
Yep.
Give me a second. Stop sharing.
All right, I'll stop sharing. I sent you the last one. If you just show the last one,
yeah.
It's kind of an example of us, thinking through practice and all sorts of different types of practice. Thanks, David.
Give me a second. Sorry.
That's okay.
Damn it. It was kind of like the last punchy bit. Oh, there you go.
There we go. Beautiful.
So do you want to put this, Annie?
Yeah, that's great. We'll just leave it there. So on the right-hand side, my other left, and it's also behind me on the wall here, is a piece of work. Ursula can explain it, but it's a cyanotype. And in it are the names of places that we worked, part of her DEPRA and part of that response to the repatriation process. And Mangala was one of those sites that we dug. So it's a cyanotype or blueprint of bits of shell, bits of bone, bits of unsorted archaeological material, fish bone, and then names that we know about from people. There's a name for turtle, there's a name for some of the places that we worked with across those time. And on the other side are a couple of my vinyl prints, one of which is published in a story that I wrote in Object Stories, and one of which I ended up leaving out. But it's kind of weirdly, when I think about it, I actually did the dolphin emerging out of the water, right? And of course, that's what you see in that first painting that we used to think our way into thinking about the sea. So that's good. So we can take that out now. Thanks, David. And we can leave it there as a background. I don't mind.
You can put the acknowledgements up.
Oh yeah, there was. Yeah, sorry. See, I'm so panicky about doing this. I forgot the manners. But so so we have many people to thank for this work.
Well, thank you very much. I'm just going to open it up to questions and just ask any participants when no one else is spotlighted at the moment. So, which means I can't see you, just to let you know. But if you want to,
I'll stop sharing.
Okay, stop sharing, and then people could put their hand up if they have questions, or alternatively put things into the chat. I love the artwork, and I think it's quite amusing, Annie, that you described yourself as a enthusiastic amateur artist. Those lino prints were really quite special.
Oh, I'm always happy to print some if anybody wants one, right?
They're beautiful. They're really beautiful.
No, I've got to get. This is why I'm going to retire. That's what I want to do when I retire, is do more art. I haven't had time, in the custom thrust and cut of the university environment, especially the last 3 years. So this actually represents for me the first writing I've done in a very, very long time. Yeah. Unfortunately, because I've been hammered, as many of us do when we take on admin roles. Yeah. So, but yes.
Jane's just sent through Jane Lyden's just sent through something saying thank you very much. What amazing long-term research is the depiction of sea motifs, bringing the sea inland, common in other places, for example, the Wellesley Ranges.
Well, yes, Wellesley's. I actually went there, which was an amazing experience last year. And yes, absolutely. And but I don't know about, it's not my area. You could probably ask Sally and everybody tomorrow, Lynette, but there's certainly there were certainly ship images there, but I don't know about other areas, whether that sort of presence of that sea is always there. I mean, one thing I do want to do in my as I retire is actually to kind of track. There's so much data now from Group, because I've had lots of consulting reports as well, but to have a look, in a sense, and track that across the landscape in much more detail, to see whether in a sense that the sea is everywhere but nowhere, right? So yeah.
Our colleague John Bradley he's worked for the last 40 odd years with the Yantarrnga people of the
Yes, of course. Yeah.
And John definitely refers to, really quite significantly inland sites being sites of the sea, where people say this is the limit of the sea, even though we would think of it as high and dry land.
Oh no, okay. No, I haven't heard. So just something from Campbell.
Yes.
About fish names. No, I haven't actually. That would be really interesting, actually, Campbell. Can you flick us the reference for that?
Yes, it'll take a little while to dig it out, but it's really amazing that he's gone through and found all these fish names that have Makassan and other language references, and it sort of fits in beautifully with your talk.
Yes, actually, that's fantastic.
Nick Evans is also recently in a conference, a seminar paper he gave for us. He referred to some shark.
Yes.
Being similarly using
Makassan. That would be fascinating. Of course, we can go back to Julie Waddy's amazing book on the ethnotaxonomy of Groote Eylandt, because she was a missionary linguist who did this extraordinary piece of work. And I guess, now that I'm sort of not everybody else is finished, but I'm sort of finishing my career. I've never written the monograph, but so that's one of the things Ursula and I will sit down and do the archaeology and art kind of monographs. I've been too scared, I think, actually, to be honest. But I think finally, my 60s, maybe the time is right. And
I think we can all say that would be highly anticipated and much desired.
Oh, well, thank you.
It's welcome to retirement.
Oh, thanks, Campbell. I mean, it's more about it's actually about I've not had any time, so that's the trouble.
I've got a couple of other questions here.
Lots.
Maddie Kelly has asked, wondering if when you returned, did you record new paintings that had been done in the intervening years?
See, I don't think so.
Not that I'm aware of. A lot of the new places that we recorded were new in people's experience as well. They hadn't been to that particular part of Yantarrnga for quite a while.
I mean, I think that's right. I mean, one of the things that did come out of my own doctoral research was a sense, both from working with people, but also from the archaeology, that particularly once the missionaries got there, so by the late 20s, people had really come out of the inland country and were absolutely focused on the coast. And today, too, people don't go in there. So when we took that old man back in there, he hadn't been to those. He knew of those places, but he had to go back and ask his old mum for the proper names and things. In fact, he shouted at me because how it is when people don't know things and they get embarrassed, and he's not meant to shame people. And so I asked him something he couldn't answer, and he shouted at me, and then went home and asked his old mum, who was then able to give him the name. And so that was just part of that process. So I think a lot of that country fell out of memory and practice in the 20s, if not, pretty much in the 20s, I think. So
one thing we did notice at Marble Point, I think it was it Marble Point? No, Hanging Rock, there was some more contemporary mark making in the form of like graffiti. One might call graffiti, but is just again potentially an expression of identity and belonging on that country, but in the form of a name. And so that was a recent addition.
I see a couple of people have popped their hands up, so I don't want to let them down. Ian McNiven first, and then Kelly.
I didn't see you there.
Yeah. Hi, Annie. Good to see you. Hi, Urs. Good to see you again after Portugal. I've been a fan of the work you guys have been doing for many, many years. So
Ian, that's very sweet of you. Thank you.
I'm just sort of thinking through the lens of my own work. I mean, I'd sort of say that, it's a classic example of sort of bringing a seascape. You don't bring the sea onto the land, but you bring the seascape onto the land, and you describe it. I mean, I also don't like using the word inscribed, but you sort of the landscape is infused with sort of maritime themes, etc., as part of the maritime identity of people. So, but I've got a couple of questions. Lynette mentioned John Bradley with the Yanua. I mean, not only do you have sort of marine-themed rock art, but you also have other sort of story sites that relate to the sea, such as stone dugongs, etc. So are there any sort of, apart from rock art, are there any sort of cosmological sites that relate to the sea or marine animals or marine processes?
There are probably, there's nothing like with a physicality, Ian, that I've ever been taken to. In the helicopter, we actually flew over for something that actually looked, there was a sort of stone arrangement that looked very like, and it would make sense, like the Yantarrnga that you see in Yolngu in Blue Mud Bay, where we worked on the Blue Mud Bay project, which are the ritual disposal centres where major ceremonies take place. And there's three. They represent the three sisters, but also, in the areas where the three sisters were, but also they're places that, I guess were sort of ritual places for cleansing. And it looked very like, I don't know, it's a big oval shape of rocks, but I've never, the dreaming sites, ancestral places.
Well, the river.
There's the river, the Yantarrnga River, of course, is cut. Yeah, so it's that, but there's nothing actually like those dugong sites that you write about. So, and, possibly on Bickerton, I think I remember being shown on a beach and I didn't take photos, of course, because it wasn't appropriate, but there was actually a similar kind of pile of turtle shell that was associated with an ancestor. So that's the only thing I can remember, to be honest.
Is there any? And so another question is there any sort of particular burial art, or do you have any burial sites that are in the burial crypts in that landscape?
Yes, yeah, very much so. Up in all of those rock shells, not all of them, but in particularly around, depending on where you are, that they were used. In fact, when I went back, I don't think you were with me, Ursi, when we went back to Angrok, which is where there's that giant prow, the huge prow painting, enormous prow painting. Old Ben went up and felt in one of the ledges, and in fact Nabby had never, and he asked us, had the old man shown us this, and I said no, and Nabby never sort of scruffed around, but he scruffed around and I think found the top part of a skull of someone, somebody who'd been buried up there. So yes, there are burials in all of those sites. Not all of them, many of them.
Certainly, because I'm thinking like with the birds and the sort of the mysterious birds, because in some places in the world people associate burials with marine birds, and they're what Krista Westerdahl, another Mr. Seascape would call like a liminal agent, because they help, because marine birds can go between the two ontological domains of the atmosphere or the air and the sea, and they help transfer the spirit of the dead.
Okay, I'd have to go back.
Yeah, but like bits of boats. I mean, that's a classic one, like in European archaeology, bodies buried with boats. There's a liminal agent. So,
that's a really good thought. Actually, as you're taking notes,
I'm going to move on to Kelly's question now. That's okay.
Thanks, Ian.
Kelly, would you like to ask your question?
Thanks. Yeah. I wanted to quickly, if I could, ask two questions, I guess. It was fantastic, and I'm really impressed with the way that you can pronounce the names of those really long rock shelter names. It's quite impressive.
I bluff it, actually, to be honest.
But I had a question, I guess, about two ways of seeing. And if we sort of think in our mind's eye back to that picture that you had of the yellow, I think, prow, with the striated one, which had the canoes in the hold.
Yes.
There were also, circles, and the same with Mankala rock shelter and the prows there. You see rectangles, squares, and circles. Now, they look pretty much to me like rectangles, squares, and circles. But what's the feedback from community about?
Well, there often are they're trepang. So there was one that has very clear trepang. Sometimes they're the metal
pots.
Sometimes they're ceramic pots, and the square ones I think are often seen as the from what people have said, are the chests or the boxes, part of the giri that people the Makassans brought onto the shore. And nowhere was that made clear in Campbell. You remember that extraordinary thing at Yirrkala when they look like the cast of Pirates of Caribbeans, but the Makassan crew came on and brought with them these boxes of gifts full of rice and blankets and cloth. And of course, one of the amazing stories on Groote is that there's a cave down the bottom. It's sacred. I mean, I would never be taken there. It's a men's site. But inside that cave, and maybe other ones too, is the story that there are still the treasures that the Makassans brought, the silks and the cloths and the swords. So that's part, there are those kinds of stories about those exchanges that exist. And there were princes, and people talk about or the old fellas used to talk about some of that stuff. So I think inside and that's what we've written. Ursula and I wrote about that in a paper called Closing the Distance, which you might want to have a read of. Or we can flick you a PDF if you send us an email, writing about, the difference between the way that European boats are portrayed and the way that Makassan boats are portrayed on Groote Eylandt.
Okay. Quick other question. You mentioned Waddy before, and I remember that I used, I checked her book when Chalupka said that one of the fish that the Makassans were fishing for off the back of one of the prows at Mankala was a databa fish. So have you had much of a feel from the rock art that you've seen about the different species of fish, animals, or whatever that
yeah, look, that actually is something we will be able to do. It's just we've not quite got ourselves organized enough in a funny way. We've done lots of fieldwork and data collecting. We've actually done bugger all analysis, to be honest. I mean, after I finished my postdoc, I got this is not making an excuse, I'm just saying this is what happened. I ended up teaching very heavily, went and did the Blue Mud Bay project, which generated a whole nother lot of data. Then I ended up at Sydney and ended up, just doing other projects. So what I get frustrated about is actually finding the time, and I'm not the best person at this, is for us both, Ursula and me both, to get back to actually going through all this data that we've got and looking at that. And actually, now that Campbell's just told us about all this stuff around Makassan names, which is incredibly exciting, we'll be able to look at maybe some of the fish, in association, even if they're not a direct association. But the first thing we'll look at are the canoe scenes, to look at the bark canoes with the dugout canoes, and many of those are often dragging in different kinds of fish and sea mammals. So I think there's a lot of work that we can do around that. So it's not a very good answer, I'm afraid, but it's coming to an inbox near you kind of.
I'd love to.
Look,
Can't wait.
We're very close to running out of time, and I
Sorry.
do want to get to at least this last question. Well, it's actually two people. Guy Geltner has asked, he's curious to know what you think the art reflects about the encounters themselves, not only a chronology, but whether or not they generate new identities. And indeed, Maddie's followed up with saying, yes, she was wondering that in relation to the scenes. Are the stories connected to specific scenes? Are they engaged in a different way to non-scenes? Just curious, she says.
Ursi? Sorry, I didn't.
No, that's okay.
I don't know if I can answer it in the time that we've got left, really.
Yeah. It is a bit of a...
Okay, the scenes, I don't think so. People don't...
What, you don't think what?
Well, I don't think that people haven't really talked to us about the scenes specifically, have they?
It's one aspect of Tyndale identified the tradition of rock art on Groote as a narrative tradition based on looking at things like the large number of fishing scenes, because there are a large number of fishing scenes. And as we pointed out, there are also all these other scenes. But yeah, there from my perspective, there is a kind of distinction between those elements which make up a composition contrasted to, the very kind of particular sort of not random, but, placement of a motif in and of itself elsewhere. I think there is definitely something different going on, but I'm not quite sure we can say what it is. I mean, I think there is more of, potentially this is something that we could suggest, because a lot of the fishing scenes involve dugout canoes, which of course are connected to contact. So it's possible that there might be, a relationship around the representation of narrative moments and storytelling and journeying that relates to that period of more recent history.
And
okay, we're going to, I'm going to, unfortunately, we need to wind it up. This has been an absolutely fantastic, great presentation. I was so taken with the work, particularly when we heard about it in Portugal earlier this year at the Society, I think it was the SHA. Yes, SHA. Which in that particular session we also had Antoinette Schapper talking about linguistic changes, and it was a wonderful session, and you've inspired me to get back to, after having had an accident, I ran out of puff, but I must get back and rustle all those papers in so that we can actually do something with them, because they're too important to let them sit. So thank you very much, Annie. Thank you, Urs. Really do appreciate it, and it was well worth the wait.
Well, thank you so much, and also for being patient. And we would like to hear from people about our ideas around blue humanities, which we didn't quite get to have a look at, but I find it a very useful way of thinking. So, but thank you so much for allowing us to come back and and give the paper.
Pleasure, absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Annie and Ursula.
Thank you, and good luck with yours tomorrow on a similar topic, I guess. At
Yes,
6:00.
yes,
I
yes.
can't be there, but I hope
Thank you
as well.
Well, it just leaves for me to say that our final seminar for the Global Encounters Network seminar series for 2023 will be on the Thursday, the 14th of December at 6 p.m. We're going to have a conversation between Dr. Stephanie Mawson and Dr. Christy Flannery about Stephanie's new book, Incomplete Conquests, The Limits of Spanish Empire in 17th Century Philippines. That's at a venue to be announced, so to be confirmed. So please check back into our website. We're just trying to work out where we might hold this because we'd like it also to be something of a, a celebration of the end of the year. So it could well be held in a pub somewhere in Melbourne. Who knows? We haven't quite got that far yet. So thank you, everybody. It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you, Urs. Thank you, Annie. And thank you, David.
Yeah, thanks.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks, David.
Yeah.
Thanks, Annie
I'm
and
sorry we
Ursula.
didn't get to all your questions. Send them on an email.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. David, let's save the chat.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Good night.
Good night.
Night.